It Takes Two by Cyril Hare. It takes two to make a murder. The psychology of a murderer has been analysed often enough. What qualifies a man to be murdered? It's a subject less frequently discussed, though sometimes, perhaps, more interesting. Derek Walton, who was killed by Ted Brackley on a dark December evening in Bolter's Mews, Mayfair, was uniquely fitted for his part in that rather sordid little drama. He was a well-built young man, 5 feet 8 inches high, with dark hair and hazel eyes. He had a toothbrush moustache and walked with a slight limp. He was employed by Mallard's, that small and thriving jeweller's establishment just off Bond Street, and at the time of his death he had in his pocket a valuable parcel of diamonds which Mallard had told him to take to Birmingham to be reset. The diamonds, naturally enough, provided the motive for the murder, but Walton would not have died exactly when and how he did, had he been fat, or blue-eyed, or more than 5'9". For Brackley was a cautious man. There was one other fact in Walton's life which finally loaded the scales against him. He was given to gambling on the dogs, and fairly heavily in debt. There was very little about Walton that Brackley did not know, after a period of intense study which had extended now for a matter of months. Patiently and remorselessly he had studied his quarry in every aspect. Every detail in his physical appearance, down to the least trick of gesture, gait or accent, had been noted with a more than lover-like devotion. A creature of habit, Walton was an easy subject for observation, and his goings out and comings in had long since been learned by heart. Brackley knew all about the lodgings in West London where he lived, the pubs he frequented, the bookies he patronised, his furtive and uninteresting love affairs. More than once he had followed him to Birmingham, where his parents lived, and to the very door of Watkinshaw's, the manufacturing jewellers there, who carried out the exquisite designs on which old Nicholas Mallard's reputation had been built. In fact, Brackley reflected, as he waited in the shadows of Bolter's Mews, about the only thing he did not precisely know about Walton was what went on inside his head. But that was an irrelevant detail, as irrelevant as are the emotions of a grazing stag to the stalker the moment before he presses the trigger. Walton was later than usual that evening. Brackley took a quick glance at his wristwatch and frowned. In 10 minutes' time the constable on his beat was due at the end of the mews. He decided that he could allow himself another 2 minutes at most, and after that the margin of safety would be too small, and the operation would have to be called off for the night. A later opportunity would offer itself, no doubt, and he could afford to wait, but it would be a pity, for the conditions were otherwise ideal. The shops had closed, and the sound of the last assistants and office workers hurrying home had long since died away. The tide of pleasure traffic to the West End had not yet set in. A faint mist, too thin to be called a fog, had begun to rise out from the damp pavements. What on earth was keeping Walton back? The 2 minutes had still 30 seconds to run when Brackley heard what he was waiting for. 50 yards away in Fentimore Street he heard the back door of Mallard's close, and the rattle of the key in the lock as Walton secured the premises behind him. Evidently he was the last one out of the shop, as usual. There was a pause, long enough to make Brackley wonder whether his quarry had defeated him by deciding to walk out into Bond Street instead of taking his usual short-cut through the mews. And then he heard the unmistakable limping footsteps coming towards him. He realised, as he slid back into the open doorway behind him, that the steps were decidedly faster than usual. That was unfortunate, since everything depended on precise timing. Now, at the critical moment, so long prepared, so carefully rehearsed, there would have to be an element of improvisation, and improvisation meant risk. Brackley had been to endless pains to eliminate risk in this affair. He resented having any put upon him. After all, he need not have worried. The business went perfectly according to plan. As Walton passed the doorway, Brackley stepped out behind him. A quick glance to either side assured him that the mews was deserted. He took 2 soundless paces in time with his victim. Then the rubber-handled cosh struck once, behind the right ear, precisely as he had intended, and Walton pitched forward without a groan. The body never touched the ground. Even as he delivered the blow, Brackley had followed up and caught it round the waist with his left hand. For an instant he stood supporting it, and then, with a quick heave, lifted it onto his shoulder and carried it into the entry from which he had emerged. The whole incident had not taken more than 10 seconds. There had been no sound except the dull impact of the blow itself and the faint clatter made by the suitcase which Walton had been carrying as it fell to the ground. The case itself and Walton's hat lying side by side in the gutter were the only evidence of what had occurred. Within a shorter space of time again, Brackley had darted out once more and retrieved them, and the door was closed silently behind him, and Bolter's mews was as silent as a grave, and as empty as a cenotaph. Panting slightly from his exertions, but completely cool, Brackley went swiftly to work by the light of an electric torch. He was standing in a small garage of which he was the legitimate tenant, and he had laid the body upon a rug behind the tailboard of a small van of which he was the registered owner. The cosh was beside it. There had been little bleeding, and he had made sure what there was had been absorbed by the rug. Quickly and methodically he went through Walton's pockets. The diamonds, as he had expected, were in a small sealed packet in an inside coat pocket. A brown leather wallet contained some of Walton's business cards, a few pound notes, and some personal papers. Then came an agreeable surprise. In a hip pocket, along with a cheap cigarette case, was a thick bundle of pound notes. Brackley did not stop to count them, but he judged there were 100 of them, more or less. He grinned in the darkness. Other arrangements had compelled him to allow Walton to go to the dog races unattended during the last 2 weeks, and evidently his luck had turned at last, and just in time. He stuffed the notes along with the rest into his own pockets, and then minutely examined the appearance of the dead man from head to foot. What he saw satisfied him completely. Walton, that creature of habit, had dressed for his work that day in exactly the same clothes as usual. The clothes that Brackley was now wearing were identically the same. Brackley's shoulders were not quite so broad as Walton's, but a little padding in the shoulders of the overcoat had eliminated that distinction. Brackley stood only 5 feet 7 inches in his socks, but in the shoes he had prepared for the occasion he looked as tall as Walton had been. A touch of dye had corrected the slight difference between the colours of their hair. Brackley stroked the toothbrush moustache which he had been cultivating for the last month, and decided that the resemblance would pass. No casual observer would have doubted that the man who limped out of the southern end of the mews carrying a small suitcase was other than the man who had entered its northern end a scant 5 minutes earlier. Certainly the newspaper seller in Bond Street did not. Automatically he extended Walton's usual paper. Automatically he made the same trite observation he made to Walton every evening, and heard without comment the reply which came to him in a very fair imitation of Walton's Midland accent, and by a piece of good fortune a policeman passing at the time noted both. He would remember the incident if the newspaper man did not. Walton's presence in Bond Street was now firmly established. It remained to lay a clear trail to Birmingham. A taxi appeared at just the right moment. Brackley stopped it, and in a voice pitched loud enough to reach the constable's ear, told the man to drive to Euston. For good measure, he asked him if he thought he could catch the 6:55 train to Birmingham, and expressed exaggerated relief when the driver assured him that he had time to spare. Walton always took the 6:55 to Birmingham, and travelled first class at the firm's expense. Brackley did the same. By a little touch of fussiness and a slightly exaggerated tip, he contrived to leave an impression on the porter who carried his bag to the train, which he hoped would be remembered. Walton always dined in the restaurant car. Brackley was in 2 minds whether to carry his impersonation as far as that. The car was well lighted, and some of his waiters had long memories and sharp eyes. He decided to venture, and had no cause to regret it. The attendant asked him if he would have a Guinness, as usual, and remarked that it was some time since he had seen him on the train, and hadn't he grown a little thinner? Brackley, taking care not to show his teeth, which were more irregular than Walton's, agreed that he had, and drank off his Guinness in the rather noisy manner that Walton always affected. He left the dining car just before the train ran into New Street, taking care not to overdo the limp. As he made his way back to his compartment, he reflected with the conscious pride of the artist that the campaign had been a complete success. What was left to be done was comparatively simple, and had been prepared with the same methodical detail as the rest. At New Street Station, Walton would abruptly and finally disappear. His suitcase would go into the railway cloakroom, to be discovered no doubt in due course, when the hue and cry for him had begun. Walking through carefully reconnoitred back streets, Brackley would make his way from the station to the furnished room where a change of clothes and identity awaited him. Next day in London, the van in which Walton's body was now stiffening would drive quietly from Bolter's Mews to the garage in Kent, where a resting place was prepared for its burden beneath 6 inches of newly laid concrete. There would be nothing to connect that unobtrusive journey with a young man last seen 100 miles the other side of London. The trail would end at Birmingham, and there inquiries would begin, and end. Walton's parents, who were expecting him for the night, were unlikely to inform the police when he failed to arrive. The first alarm would probably be sounded by Watkinshaw's, when the diamonds they were expecting were not delivered in the morning. Whether Walton's disappearance was held to be voluntary or not was an academic question, which it would be interesting to follow in the newspaper reports. But he judged that when the state of Walton's finances was revealed, the police would be cynical enough to write him off as yet another trusted employee who had yielded to temptation when his debts got out of hand. A hunt for a live Walton, fugitive from justice, would be an additional assurance that Walton dead would rest undisturbed. As the lights of New Street showed through the carriage windows, Brackley tested in his mind the links of the chain he had forged. Were they adequate? The newspaper seller, the taxi driver, the porter, the waiter, would they come forward when required? Would they remember him with certainty? Human testimony was fallible, after all, and the chain might snap somewhere. Yet, short of proclaiming himself aloud as Walton on the station platform, there was nothing further he could do. He was gazing absently at the elderly lady who shared his compartment, when it suddenly came to his mind that there was still something that might be done, a last artistic touch to put the issue beyond a doubt. Her suitcase was on the rack above her head, and his, Walton's, lay next to it. He noticed for the first time that they were remarkably alike. It was a cheap line from Oxford Street, he knew. Seizing the chance which a kind fate provided, he rose quickly when the train stopped, took her bag from its place, and stepped out onto the platform. It worked like a charm. Before he had limped half the length of the train, his late companion had overtaken him, carrying his case and calling on him to stop.
"Excuse me, but you've made a mistake. That's my bag you've got in your hand."
Brackley smiled tolerantly. "I'm afraid you've made a mistake yourself, ma'am. You've got your own bag there. You see how alike they are."
"But I'm positive."
The old lady was doing her stuff magnificently, as if she had been coaxed for the part.
"It was right above my head and you took it. That's my bag. I'd know it anywhere."
Just as he had hoped, the form of a railway policeman loomed magnificently onto the scene.
What's going on here?"
The lady drew breath to speak, but Brackley got in first. He was not going to lose the opportunity he had worked for.
"This lady seems to think I've stolen her bag, officer. I've done nothing of the sort. I'm a perfectly respectable person. My name is Walton. I'm employed by Mallard's, the London jewellers. I've my business card here, if you'd like to see it, and—"
"Oh, that'll do, sir, that'll do.
Nobody's said anything about stealing yet."
"Of course not. It is a mistake. That's what I keep telling him. But I want my bag all the same."
"Quite so, madam."
The officer was enjoying himself hugely.
"Now, let's have a look at them."
He laid them side by side upon the platform.
"Well, now, they are alike, aren't they? No labels and no marks. You careless people. That's the way luggage gets lost. And then it's all blamed on the railways. What do you say, Mr.
Walton is the name.
Have you any objection to my opening one of these, so we can settle it once and for all?
Not the smallest.
And you, madam?
No, not at all.
Here goes, then.
He took Walton's suitcase and put it on a bench and unfastened the catch. The lid opened, and the pitiless glare of the station lights illuminated what it held. They shone down upon the myriad facets of a mass of jewellery, hastily crammed together, and on top of all, a rubber-handled cosh, its tip hideous with a congealed mass of blood and hair, white hair, the hair of old Nicholas Mallard, who even now was lying huddled beneath his counter in Fentimore Street, where Walton had left him. That was It Takes Two by Cyril Hare, read by Matthew Jones. Thank you for listening to M Jam from